Hello, I'm Lucy Brazier. I'm the CEO of March & Publishing, and we publish Executive Support magazine. I'm absolutely delighted to have been invited to talk to you today about public speaking, although I know that some of you will think, well, what has public speaking got to do with my career as an assistant? Because for most of you, you're never going to be asked to give a presentation like this one. However, it becomes more and more important for assistants to be able to find their voice and to be able to stand up and confidently deliver even just a few slides, or to make points at the end of a meeting, or to stand up in front of the team and to explain what it is that you're doing. And so I can't tell you how happy I am to be sharing the tips that I've learned over a decade in my career as a speaker. So who am I to talk to you about this subject? Well, for those of you that don't know me, I spent much of the last decade travelling all over the world and speaking at events. At last count, it was over 500 events in over 50 countries, and I've headlined at some of the top conferences in the world for assistants. And so I hope I know a little bit about storytelling and how to engage my audience. So here then is my very first piece of advice, and it's about getting settled on stage before you do anything else. And those of you that will have seen me present before know that I usually start my presentations with a piece of shtick, and it's about 1.5 minutes long, but it just settles me down. It's scripted, it's always the same, and it just means that I look at the audience and I realise they're not going to kill me, because even after speaking all over the world like I do, I still get nervous. And actually the day I stop getting nervous is the day I should go home and not do this anymore, because it means it's ceased to matter. But the piece of nonsense goes something like this. So every time I speak at an event, if you followed me on social media, you will know that I take a photograph of the audience, and then I post it on social media, the picture of you waving, and then I also post it on our newsletter, which is called Making Waves. You see what we did there? And then what we find is that we get people waving back at you from about 24 different countries. So it's a really nice way to connect the world and to make you feel like you're part of the one profession, one voice movement. So what I would love for you to do today for me is to take a picture of yourself watching this video, because obviously I can't be there in person today, so I can't take a picture of the complete audience. But if you take the photograph and you post it on social media and you tag me, Lucy Brazier, and you tag the PA Hub, then one of you will win a place at ES Tech, which is our big conference that's coming up in September, which is all about technology for administrative professionals. So take the photograph, put it anywhere on social media, tag me, tag the PA Hub, and then we'll pick it up and we'll pick one, and one of you will win a ticket to ES Tech. It's nice, isn't it? I'm hoping you'll do it, actually, because it's really great publicity for the PA Hub, it's really great publicity for me, you might win a ticket. But quite apart from that, it gets me settled down. It means that I knew what I was going to say and I can just breathe and get into the presentation before I have to go any further. But it also means that actually you're feeling comfortable. You're thinking, oh, well, that was different. Okay, I might take my photograph. And now we're all settled and we can get on with the job in hand. Now, before we start, what I want to do is to talk about how it can all go horribly wrong. And to that end, I found this film, which I found gently amusing, and I would love to share it with you.
Quadruple checking notes as people file in, getting the computer ready, and asking everyone to take a seat. Pretending to click something on the computer to cover up the fact that I don't know what to do with myself.
Arriving just in time.
Wrapping up our conversation about a popular TV show we watched last night.
Disdain for popular TV show.
Mediocre icebreaker joke that doesn't quite land. Attempt to redeem myself by making fun of that guy.
Laughing at that guy.
Laughing because he's laughing and I like him.
Not laughing, and now checking out for the rest of the session.
Title, dramatic pause of my presentation.
Question about how long this session will last?
Annoyed, vague response.
Exaggerated eye roll.
Poignant quote from unknown philosopher to kick off presentation in dramatic fashion. Juvenile slide transition to spice things up. Reading a long paragraph exactly as it appears on the PowerPoint slide about a shocking statistic I just learned about, followed by all kinds of vague lingo that no one will remember 2 seconds from now, capped off by 3 bullet points. So, proudly pause to make sure everyone notices my awesome clip art choice. Out of date pop culture reference.
Correction about pop culture reference.
Defending pop culture reference by citing social networking site no one uses.
Audible sigh to make sure everyone knows this is a complete waste of my time.
Serious and somewhat over-the-top reminder about how important this information is. Unexpected technical difficulty. Embarrassed people can see my desktop background.
Snide remark about how Macs are better than PCs.
Desperate plea for IT guy.
Fixing the problem with an annoyed look on my face so that everyone knows how good at computers I am.
Unfunny video I'm really proud of having created myself.
Texting my friend in a way that I think is discreet.
Clearly aware of the texting. Prefacing a preface of a preface so that no one really understands the point that I'm prefacing. And now, going through a long list of facts, one by one by one. Asking if anyone has any questions. Reminding everyone there are no bad questions. Hoping if I wait long enough, someone will finally have a question. Concluding by restating the title of my presentation and dismissing everyone. Excited that someone came back for a follow-up conversation.
Grabbing pen that I accidentally left.
Horrible, 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 right? We've all been there. We all know how that feels. And I think one of the things that we find really scary is that we think, will our presentation feel like that when it comes to us standing up in front of people? You know, the likelihood is that it won't be horrible. But actually, when we go to present, very often we talk ourselves out of doing a really good job. Let's look at emotional intelligence for a moment and at this scenario. And this scenario is one that I teach in my class. Very often when I present it, the assistants sitting in the room go pale and start shaking their heads. There's usually a few that would be happy with it, but let's take a look. So your executive has called you from home on the day that she is due to present to the board on the restructure of the assistants within this organisation. She can't come in and she suddenly wants you to present to the board on her behalf. How does that make you feel? Are you feeling sick and trembly now? Are you thinking, no way, I can't do that? Well, let me tell you, you just jumped over a major opportunity because you thought about it negatively. Let's look at the impact of thinking about this scenario, not from a positive point of view. So your automatic thoughts then are, oh my goodness, she can't be serious. I've had no real time to prepare. This has been dropped on me at the last minute and I'm really not ready. So your stomach is churning and you have pressure building in the back of your neck. She, the boss, should have done this. It's really not fair. The finance director hates me. I am going to be up there. They're going to see that it's clearly not planned and I'm going to look like a fool. So now you have severe anxiety and fear. And the result of that is that it goes horribly. They're not really very convinced. You stutter over all your words and they say come back in a month's time and represent, probably with your boss. You just jumped over a major opportunity because you talked yourself out of it. What is the evidence that your automatic thoughts were true? Let me tell you, there isn't any. It's purely your brain playing tricks on you. Could there be an alternative explanation? Well, of course there could. Maybe your executive was thinking, this is my chance to put her in front of the board and show what she's really made of. I've been wanting to do that for ages, and today I have suddenly got to do something with one of my kids because there's an emergency, and this is the opportunity I've been waiting for. What is the best and the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that can happen is probably what has just happened, which is that you have got up there and you weren't prepared enough and you talked yourself out of giving a good presentation, and they want you to come back and represent. The best that can happen is that you do an amazing job and they suddenly see you as the business person and leader that you are, rather than just an assistant. And the effect of believing the automatic thoughts has really stitched you up, because you haven't seen what the opportunity is and you haven't given yourself a chance. Let's just have a look at what could be the effect of changing your thinking in this situation. By the way, this quote from Mark Twain has never been more true. There are two types of speakers, those that are nervous and those that are liars. You know, the very first time I got up to speak to people, it was about 600 people, and I had a lectern in front of me and I could physically feel my knees knocking together. So I was very pleased that that lectern was there. I felt sick. But you know, even with the amount that I speak on the circuit, every time I stand up to speak, I feel sick, usually for at least 15 minutes before I get up there. But I've come to recognise that that is about nervous energy. And actually, it's a good thing, because if I take that energy and I use it, it gives a great presentation. The day I cease to feel that way is the day I should give up, because it is the day that it ceases to matter. The other thing that I would say to you is that after dying, the thing that people fear most is public speaking. I don't know about you, but I've never seen a headstone that says died of public speaking. So you're going to live through it. And if you do it correctly, it's going to really give you a handle on your career that people are going to say, wow, you know, she really knows how to talk business and how to be persuasive when it comes to having an argument and how to get people to get on board with ideas that you've got. So it really is a skill that's worth driving yourself forward for. And this is the other thing, it turns out that I feel slightly more alive when I'm scared. So although it is scary, you know, the first time you tell a joke and it lands and a room goes up, there's no feeling like that. It's worth practicing and getting used to the way that it makes you feel. Let's look then at how, if we change your opinion slightly, you're going to do a much, much better job. Here are your new automatic thoughts. Oh my goodness, what an opportunity. Ideally the boss should be doing this, but something else must have come up. I know it's short notice, but I'm going to do my very best within the allotted time. So now you have a slight churning in your stomach. The executive and you have a meeting on the phone and they give you a steer on the key players so you know what you're doing. You know that the finance director is a tricky customer and therefore you spend time in depth going through the figures. And the team has worked really hard on this, but you've been at the heart of it, so you believe in your approach. So now you're feeling positive, although you're feeling nervous. The adrenaline is pumping, but that's to be expected. And you're feeling anxious, but you know you're going to knock them dead. And you get up there and you do an absolutely amazing job. And you're really popular with the people that are sitting around the table because they can see the work that you've put in and they get it. So they give the go-ahead to launch date. And the finance director was particularly impressed with your cost-benefit analysis. Exactly the same situation, it's just a difference in the way that you approach it and the way you think about it. So what I would say is then, the next time someone asks you to speak, or indeed the next time somebody gives you something to do that makes you scared, what I want you to do is to go through this ABC for me. And that is, that you take the activating event and you try to decide whether it's real or whether it's imagined. Then you think about your beliefs and your interpretation. Is your response a rational one or an irrational one that's going to mean that you jump over an opportunity? And finally, what are the consequences of your reaction? What are the feelings that you're evoking, and what behaviour is that going to lead to? Is this something that's going to benefit you or not? It's worth remembering that you have a lizard brain. Your lizard brain is about this big, it's about the size of a walnut, and it sits in the back of your head. And it's your prehistoric brain. It's the brain that says, you can't, you shouldn't, I should run. The fight or flight mechanism. And it takes a full 7 seconds to kick in your modern brain. So count to 7, and if you're still feeling really scared, then maybe you should run. But give yourself the opportunity to go through this ABC first. I want to talk for a moment about the difference between notes and storytelling. And right in the beginning, when I first started public speaking, I would tie myself in knots with notes. So I would want to get everything down on paper, and there were crossings out and there were scribblings, and then I'd rewrite it again, and then I'd take out my yellow highlighter pen, and there would be markings all over the piece of paper, and then I would stand at a lectern because God forbid I should make connection with the audience, and I would look up at the audience and I would train myself to look down at the paper and to look up at the audience and to look down at the paper and to look up at the audience. And you know what? It was hell, because the minute you get nervous, when you look down and you look up again and then you look down again, you have no clue where you are. And somebody gave me a great piece of advice in that they said, nobody out there actually knows what's meant to come next. So it doesn't matter if you're tying yourself up in knots and you get it wrong, because as long as you keep talking, it's going to be okay. But the very best piece of advice came from my father, and those of you that have heard me interviewed will know that my dad was the head of drama at the BBC. So after the first few speeches where I really was absolutely terrible, I went to him and I said, you know, Papa, I really don't know how to do this. Can we talk through the best way for me to deliver something that has passion and impact? And he said to me, you know, Lucy, you have an amazing story to tell. So tell it. And tell it with all the magic that you would tell a 5-year-old. And he said, get rid of those notes. The best thing to do is to have pictures and to talk round those pictures. Imagine that you're telling a fairy story. So for example, the 3 billy goats gruff, and use the pictures to move on to the next part of the story. It'll remind you so that you don't get stuck. And you know what? These days, actually, there are occasions where I turn up at events and people say, could you say a few words? Maybe you could do 20 minutes for us. And I'm always really happy to do that, because I will put down bullet points, but the bullet points will point back to the pictures. I know my presentations well enough now that I am able to say, okay, bullet point 1 is change. Bullet point 2 is the history. Bullet point 3 is Belbin. And I literally just need that one word to remind me what I'm going to talk about next, because it does point back to the pictures. It means that I can use my creativity, I can use the way that my voice sounds, I can use my body language, and I can really get my point across without getting tied down to the notes. This is usually one of my very first slides. It actually says change down there in the bottom right hand corner, but I use this slide as my first slide because it sets the scene. I want something that's going to grab their attention so that they go, this isn't going to be death by PowerPoint, it's not going to be boring, it's going to be something that I'm going to pay attention to, and it really does set the tone for what comes next. So think very carefully about that first slide. After you've done your introduction, your 1.5 minutes of shtick, what comes next? What's going to make your audience go, oh, I feel comfortable, I'm in safe hands. That's what you want. Let's talk learning styles for a minute now. And learning styles are all about the way that you onboard information. And your audience is going to be made up of people who have all 3 different types of learning style. You're also going to have members of the audience who are left-brained and right-brained, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that first. So if you take a look at this picture of this girl, then which way is she turning? Is she turning clockwise or is she turning anti-clockwise? Now, if she's turning clockwise, then you're using more of the right side of your brain. And if she's turning anti-clockwise, it's more of the left side of your brain. And I can hear you saying, what does that mean? Well, before I get onto that, just try and see if you can get her to change direction, because if you concentrate, you should be able to. And which way are you seeing her turning? Because there isn't a right way or a wrong way, it's purely the way that your brain functions. So, if you are left-brained, then you're thinking in a linear way, in an ordered way, in a logical way. It's probably much more mathematical and thinking about things in a factual tone. If you are right-brained, it's going to be far more creative. You're far better with pictures and with music and with art. So, if I ask the audience usually to describe the room that they're sitting in and to write 3 bullet points for me, the people who are left-brained are likely to say this room is a rectangle, it's painted white, it has 2 doors in it. If they are right-brained, they're likely to say to me, it's a beautiful room, it has a nice atmosphere, it feels warm. Can you see? Very different ways of describing things, but you need to get to both sides if you're giving a presentation. And to that end, there are different ways of talking about things, and you'll see that I have done that so far in the presentation. So it's explaining if you're left learning, it's having some kind of discussion and debate and reasoning. It's all factual. On the other hand, if you're wanting to get the people with right brains, you're wanting to tell stories and give metaphors and similes, give analogies, give illustrations to your point, so that they can really picture in their heads exactly what it is that you're saying. And then there are the 3 different types of learning. And those 3 different types of learning are visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So if somebody is visual, they're going to want to see things in pictures, or you're going to have to paint pictures in their head. If they're auditory, they're going to be listening to you and what you're saying, and to the tone and pace and pitch of voice. And if they're kinesthetic, you're going to have to give them things to do or things to watch or things to respond to, because that's the way that they learn. And you need to make sure that you're covering all 3 in your presentation so that you reach your audience. Now, I want you to think for a moment about an incredible speech that you have heard. It might be a historic speech. It might be a speech that a family member made at an event, maybe at a wedding, something like that. But why was it so amazing? Usually it's because it came from the heart, and usually it's because it takes you through an emotional journey. It should be a speech that makes you want to laugh out loud, or cry, or be inspired. A really good speech will bring people along with you so that they are travelling on a journey which has a destination that you want them to get to at the end. Can you think of a great speech? What's it like? What did it inspire in you? Why was it so amazing? Here are the 3 ways in which people communicate, and it's really interesting to note the percentages there in terms of how you influence people. So look at this. In terms of communication, body language is responsible for 55%. Then tone and pace and pitch of voice is 38%. And the words are only down to 7%. Isn't that extraordinary? So all that time we're worrying about what we're going to say, it's as much about how we say it as it is about the words themselves and how we present ourselves. Now, if you're not sure about the body language piece, let's look at this as an example. And this is a really great example. If you're not familiar with it, it was the very first televised presidential debate between Nixon and JFK. And up until that point, all presidential debates had been done on radio. Now, both of the speakers turned up without having been given any advice. It wasn't like today where you would have lots of coaching and makeup artists and people who would give you advice on style. And Nixon had just suffered from flu, and so he was slightly pasty looking. He didn't have any makeup on. Nevertheless, the people that listened to him on the radio thought that he had won the debate. But JFK turned up straight from a golfing holiday, so he was relaxed, and he was tanned, and he was in a slightly more modern suit, and the people that listened on TV knew that he had won the debate. Had we not had television, the point is that we would probably never have had President JFK. That is the power of body language and its influence. Let's talk for a moment then about acting how you want to be perceived. And right at the top of the list is posture. Posture is so important. We all know those people who walk into a room and they're bent over and their heads are down and they don't look confident at all, do they? And if you're walking out in front of a room of people, whether that's on stage or just in a meeting, having posture that is correct says I'm confident and I feel good about what I'm going to talk about. So imagine you have a piece of string coming out of your head and stand really tall. Another really good hint is to hold your hand behind your back and grab your thumb, because when you let your hands down, you're going to be standing in perfect posture. It's a great start. And what are your signature gestures? Do you stand there and play with your wedding ring when you're nervous? Or do you twiddle your hair or your earring? Or if you have a clicker or a pen, do you stand there doing that? All those things are signs that you're nervous, and as an audience member, it doesn't make me feel comfortable. I want to feel secure that you know your stuff and I'm going to get an entertaining presentation. We all know as an audience member how it makes us feel when the person up there is really nervous. You feel like you're almost going to have to catch them if they fall. It's a bit like watching your child at a school concert where you're really nervous for them. It doesn't make for something where you're going to be listening to what the presenter says because you're so concerned that they're going to go wrong. So get your posture right, get up there, don't fidget, and then you can adopt clusters of postures and positions and gestures that are going to be right for your audience and right for the situation. Now let's talk about body language in a bit more depth. Look at this lady. She looks rather autocratic and like she isn't wanting to be engaged. And that's because she's got her arms crossed. It's a defense mechanism. It puts up a barrier between you and the audience, and it can say that you feel that you know better. Be careful that you're not doing that with your hands. Or look at this, the lectern. I spoke about this a little while ago when I was speaking about notes, but a lot of you would prefer to stand behind the lectern because you feel that it puts a barrier between you and the audience, and because you can put your notes out on it and you can look up and down. It is precisely that, a barrier between you and the audience. Come out from behind it, walk around, make your point. It's going to make you far more engaged with them. And talking about hands, your palms are something that when you show them, it's really prehistoric in the way that people respond. You know that thing where people go, honestly? When you show your palms, it shows that you can trust you. So make sure that when you're speaking, you're doing a lot of this. When you're trained as a speaker, one of the positions that they give you is to do this, and to start with it feels quite difficult, but actually it's a position from which you can take your hands out like this, and it's great to be expressive and use your hands in that way. Now walking. You know, some people when they get nervous either rock from foot to foot when they're stood on stage, or they walk, and they walk like a maniac, and when they come off stage the Fitbit says you've done your 10,000 steps. It's all down to nerves. When you are walking on stage, you should only walk when you're making a new point. So stand still, don't fidget, use the expressiveness of your hands, but when you go on to a new point in your presentation, then you can walk. The other thing that I would say to you is that if you're using NLP, then if I'm standing over on this side of the stage, so on the left, that is the past. If I'm standing in the middle, I should be talking about the present, and if I'm standing on the right, I should be talking about the future. So if you're telling a story on stage which takes you from the past to the present to the future, if you want it to go into the audience's head and remain there, then it's a really good thing to do, to walk from one side of the stage to the other over the course of you telling the story. Now this is the lovely Wonder Woman pose, and Amy Cuddy, who is the lady there on the right with her arms in the air, is the lady who is the greatest exponent of this. She used it in her TED talk, and I kind of think it's a bit silly, but it does have truth in it. So what Amy Cuddy says is that when you are going into a situation when you're nervous, like a meeting which you're not sure about the conversation you're going to have, or to present or whatever, you should go beforehand to a darkened corner or to a bathroom stall, and you should stand there for a couple of minutes with your hands on your hips, a little like Wonder Woman, and then you're going to get the adrenaline to go in there and do your stuff. It's a bit silly because I can see people standing all over the world in bathroom stalls like Wonder Woman before they go into meetings. But the grain of truth in it is this: when you get nervous, you breathe in a much shallower way. And what that does is it means you produce more saliva, and that goes into your stomach, and that's what makes you feel sick because it turns acidic. So if you are breathing properly, in other words, you breathe in for 3, and then you breathe out for 3, and you do that 3 times, you get more oxygen to your head, which means that you're not getting so befuddled. You know that feeling when you're really nervous and you don't feel you can think properly? It's because your breathing is shallow and therefore you aren't getting enough oxygen to your brain. So that will calm you down. But also you're less likely to get sick because you're not producing all that acid saliva that goes to your stomach. So there is truth in it. Maybe you just want to do the breathing, the 3 deep breaths in and the 3 deep breaths out, counting to 5 every time. This is really worth noting because for many of you, you come to me after I've given my big keynote presentations and you say, oh, I would love to do what you do. And I'm sure you would, and so would I when I first started out as well. But you know, it's taken me 30 years to become an overnight success. I've been training almost since 5 years into my career, and I really had to practice. Even when I started out 10 years ago on the speaking circuit, I did 2 years where I spoke for no money at all, travelling all over the world and offering to speak to anybody who would have me so that I could practice and make sure that the jokes landed and we didn't tumbleweed, and to work out where I could get people emotional and where I could get them to laugh and how I could do all that stuff. And even now, I often speak at events for free, usually when I have new material that I want to practice, because it's unfair to get people to pay to hear you speak unless you really, really know how to do it. So what I would suggest to you if you're wanting to get onto the speaking circuit is to offer to speak to people at your business, offer to speak at local networks, get into going to events where you might be able to say a few words, but really, really practice. It's a bit like being a stand-up comedian. I also have speakers on my circuit who will come and speak at my events free of charge because they use it as a safe ground in order to practice new speeches that they have got, so that the audience isn't paying for something that, you know, isn't up to scratch when they get to the really big events. When I went to put together this presentation, I went and I looked at all sorts of TED Talks, but actually right at the beginning of my speaking career, I did the same thing. I watched the top 10 TED Talks to see what lessons I could learn. And it really boiled down to this for me. The message has to be simple. You have to really, really understand it in minute detail, and it needs to be authentic. So basically, you're connecting over the content. If you want to see how to speak to an audience, you could do a lot worse than going and looking at those top 10 TED Talks. Every single one of them has a clarity about them. You could boil the message down to probably 1 sentence. It's just they're talking around it for 20 minutes. Every person is talking from their heart, They're utterly authentic. They're not trying to be somebody that they're not. And the content is a way of connecting with the audience. You have to understand that it's about storytelling and it's about them going through an emotional journey with you, not just about you talking at them. Let's talk dress code now, and I have very firm ideas on dress code. I will dress very, very differently if I'm facilitating to how I dress if I'm a keynote. So if I'm facilitating, in other words, I'm interviewing somebody or I'm doing a panel discussion, I will tend to dress in colours that are probably more subdued. So maybe black, maybe dark brown, maybe a dark green colour, because I am not the focal point, my guests are. On the other hand, if I'm keynoting, you'll usually find me in something bright yellow or bright red. In fact, the silk suit that you see me in there, I had made for me in Hong Kong so that I had something absolutely perfect when I was talking to an audience of 1,500 people. I wanted for them to be able to say, that's where she is in the room after I came off stage, so that they could come and ask me questions. Assistants are not very good at wearing bright colours. You seem to find it something that is outside of your comfort zone. So if you don't feel comfortable in dressing in something really bright when you get up to make a presentation, then maybe just have a really distinctive piece of jewellery or a bright scarf or something like that. But certainly don't sit there in subdued colours. It doesn't serve you well to be taking a back seat, especially if you're talking at an event. And then you want to be taking your audience through an emotional journey. I've talked about this already, and usually no more than 3 different sites. So for me, just as an example, my keynote, which is the modern day assistant, will take them through 3 different emotions. The first is fear. I scare my audience to death. So having done the opening, which is the 1.5 minutes of shtick, which I really understand, and my opening slide, which grabs their attention. After that, the first part of my talk scares you all to death and tells you that your jobs are going out the window and why that's going to happen unless you get it together. The second part of my talk is about giving you hope. It's about looking at what the future might be and talking around what businesses do need rather than what they don't need. And then the third part of my talk is to get you really excited so that you walk out of the other end going, I'm feeling really inspired to go and do all sorts of amazing things that I didn't know I was capable of. But every talk that you give should do exactly that. You should think about the 3 emotions that you want your audience to go through, and then you should be structuring the content to make sure that they're going through that emotional journey with you. And then reading the room. Now, I started off right at the beginning as a salesperson, so I was quite used to looking at the way people were reacting to me within a room and acting accordingly. And I learnt body language very early on so that I could read the way that they were feeling about what I was saying, because you would learn to pick out the person in the room who was totally against buying what it was that you were selling, and then you would focus all your attention on them so that they came round. Likewise, if I'm standing in a room of people teaching and the organiser of the event is giving out evaluation forms at the end, you need to be sure that everybody in the room is on board. So you're constantly looking for people who haven't quite got it so that you make sure everybody knows exactly what it is you're talking about and comes out feeling inspired. It's very interesting, especially when I'm talking for a corporate. Quite often the audience will start off like this with their arms folded and looking very uncomfortable. And that's because they've been told to attend and they're not on board yet. And it's almost like, they've told us you're good, go on then, let's hear it. But over a period of time in that presentation, the arms come down, they start leaning forward. And what I really love is when they start doing that. Because when they start to do that, what it means is, in prehistoric terms, I don't think you're going to bite me on the neck and kill me. I now trust you. So I can read a room, I can work it, I can see where people are engaged and I can play to that. I can see where people have switched off and I can bring them back in by asking them questions. I can see where people are excited or unhappy or moved. Whatever it happens to be, you can play to that audience, but you have to study your body language enough to really understand how to use that to play the room. Now let's talk about conflict for a moment, because especially if people have been told they've got to be in a presentation, you will find on occasion that you've got people who are heckling. And if that's the case, and they're asking lots and lots of really awkward questions, the best thing that you can do is to make sure that they understand that you are listening to them. So I would start out with showing empathy and showing that you're listening. I hear you. I understand exactly what you're saying. Then I would look at areas of agreement. So I'm hearing you, I understand what you're saying, and I would agree with you to a certain extent, so that they don't feel that you're getting into an argument with them. But then what you want to do is you want to dig. You want to make sure that actually when you do answer their query, you're answering the correct query and not just what you think it is. So what I would be doing is to summarize what they've said to you and feed it back to them. So if I'm understanding you correctly, the question that you have for me that you would like me to answer is this. That way you're not going to answer what in your head you think the question is and find they say, no, that isn't what I meant at all, and you're digging yourself a deeper hole. So make sure you clarify what it is that they're wanting answered and then build off that so that you are able to answer their questions, acknowledge them, show that they're being listened to, and then you can, if you don't know the answer, engage the audience to help you find the solution. There's nothing worse than somebody asking you a question and you're thinking, I don't know the answer, I don't know the answer, and then just throwing anything that you can at them. The best way to do it is to say to everybody else, you know what? Right now I'm not sure of the answer to that, and I'm going to go away and have a think about it, and I will come back to you if you come up after the presentation and give me your card. But in the meantime, does anybody else in the audience have any ideas around that? It's another way to get your audience engaged and to make them see that you're human and that you don't have all the answers, but that you're quite comfortable up there in asking their opinion. It's nice to be asked your opinion, isn't it? It makes you feel that you're valued. Here are some very definite don'ts. The first of which is standing up there and saying, I'm really nervous, this is my very first speech. For all the reasons we talked about earlier. People want to feel secure, they want to feel comfortable, they want to feel that they're going to be entertained, even if it's a business meeting. So get up there and give it everything you've got. You can tell them later on, once you're off stage, that it was your first speech, and then you'll get all the, wow, that was your first speech, you were amazing. But don't tell them while you're up there. It doesn't make for a sound speech. Don't give them death by PowerPoint. Lots and lots of bullet points makes for hell. I feel slightly hypocritical saying that because the next few slides do have quite a lot of bullet points on them, but most of the presentation, as you will have seen, is made up of pictures. It's just that at the end I wanted to summarise. So on the whole, try and use pictures so that you can take them from one part of the story to the next. And then finally, work out what your ideal number of slides is. For me, I know that if I have about 1 slide per minute, because I talk so fast, that's probably about right. And I can use that to move things forward. But there's nothing worse than if you are somebody in an audience knowing that you have 10 minutes to go and somebody's still got 60 slides. I've also seen presenters who only do 5 slides for an hour, but they're so brilliant at it that it works really, really well. Work out how long you can talk for before you change a slide, or work out how to talk without using slides and just using bullet points, as I talked about earlier. Either way, just make sure that you haven't got hundreds of slides and that you're overrunning, because most speakers that are any good finish on time or slightly under. You certainly don't want to go over. You're going to give your organiser a whole heap of headaches if you do that. So then, here are my bullet points. Do practice. Practice, practice, practice. Make sure you're keeping to time. Work out what it feels like to speak for 45 minutes or an hour so that you know instinctively when you're getting there. Do fact check. Don't just reel off facts and figures without making sure that they are actually genuine. Watch how other people present. Go look at those TED Talks. Sit in presentations and really take note as to the way that the people that are amazing are giving those presentations and adopt it. Know your slides. Don't be sitting there thinking, what's the next slide that comes up? Know exactly what's going to come up before it does. Make sure you arrive early to test the AV. I will always get to a conference room between 6:30 and 7 in the morning, just as the AV people get there, so I can test my microphone, so I can make sure that all my videos are working, so I can make sure that my slides haven't suddenly gone off sync. And there's nothing worse, is there, than sitting there watching somebody presenting where it all falls apart because the tech doesn't work, or a link doesn't work, or a video suddenly doesn't play with sound. Get there early. Make sure that it all works. Stand on the stage before you present. There's a great comfort to getting up on the stage and just looking at the audience and where they're going to be sitting and working out how you walk around and whether there are any holes in the stage. I've actually walked out on stage and my shoe has caught on a hole on the stage before now. I actually kicked off my shoes and walked towards the front of the audience and said I wasn't meant to be a girl, but it was really a huge audience and it can really throw you. So get up there, have a look. I always invite my speakers to do the same thing. I will always use a clicker. I will put my presentation into presenter view so I can see how long that I have still got to go in my presentation and what is coming next. And if I can, I have a comfort monitor, because if you have a comfort monitor sitting just in front of the stage, when you click you can see your next slide, and it means you don't have to keep turning behind you in order to see what you're going to say next. There's a great comfort in the comfort monitor because it means that you don't have to worry. Do have light and shade. There's nothing worse, is there, than somebody standing up there on stage who is just monotone and is telling the same things in the same kind of tone, and this is really interesting. Not. You want to take things big, and you want to take things small, and you want to tell stories, and you want to create magic. Meet and greet people. Whenever I'm presenting at a live event, I will stand by the door and I will say good morning to people, and I'll ask them where they're from and what made them choose to come to this presentation this morning. And I engage with them so that they feel welcomed. There's never any second chance to make a first impression. Make sure you have water on stage. It took me a few gigs to work out that actually I didn't want to be choking up there on stage and asking somebody in the audience for water. Now I always have warm water up there. It's better than cold. Make sure that you are asking questions and that the audience is engaged. It shouldn't be just you giving the presentation. It should be the audience and you having a conversation. Otherwise it can get deathly boring. If you're presenting quotes, or if you're talking about something another speaker says, just make sure you give it a source. There's nothing wrong at all with saying this is an amazing point and it came from this other speaker. Make sure that you really understand it, especially if you're giving a technical presentation. Don't rest until you understand exactly what the piece of technology is all about, or until you understand that exactly what the figures are. There is nothing worse than being asked lots of questions and not being able to answer them because you were hoping to gloss over it. Slow down. There's a power in the pause. When we get scared, our voices tend to go a lot higher and a lot faster. So if you're speaking slightly too slowly and you feel like you're speaking slightly too low, you've probably got it at about the right pace. Breathe, smile, enjoy it. You know, there is no feeling like being up there when it goes well. I know you're scared to death that it's going to go badly, but if you can make yourself relax, and usually after a couple of minutes into it, that isn't too difficult, then you're going to have a ball up there. It's interesting, isn't it, when you look at these four women? Which speaker do you think that you would like to see most? Well, when I do this live and we do a vote on it, by a mile the person that they choose is Corinne Hoisington, who is the lady with her palms outstretched. It's what I was saying earlier about honesty and showing your palms. It's over 50% usually that go for Corinne. Followed usually by Dr. Veronica Cochrane, who is the lady at the other end of this panel, who is the current CEO of the IAAP. And she is probably one of the best speakers that I have ever seen on the circuit. She has a real magic about her, and you can see that just from the way that she's holding her hands. The lady in the blue is Florence Katono. She's from Uganda. She's an up-and-coming speaker, and she's really getting there. But the one who usually gets the least number of votes is Chantal Schnickers, and this is the lady who is in the kind of greeny yellowy colour. And that's because she's not a professional speaker. She's the only one of them who isn't a professional speaker. She is the deputy chair of the European Association, and you can see from her body language that she's feeling slightly uncomfortable up there. It's what I'm talking about when it comes to posture. Isn't it interesting that even without hearing any of them speak a word, you can see which ones are the ones that are going to be engaging? Think on it. So then after I have presented, I will always write to the organiser to say thank you. I will send my slides in PDF format so that they can share them with the audience, never in PowerPoint, because then people can copy them, and I want to make sure they have my copyright on the bottom of them. But then also I will send links to things that maybe I've talked about in my presentation so that the audience gets some follow-up afterwards. It's another way to stay connected after the presentation and to make sure that we are engaged with each other. So I know you feel a bit scared about it, for most of you, but I want you to remember that a ship in port is safe, but that isn't what ships are built for. And especially right now, assistants all over the world are needing to step up, and they're needing to make a greater impression in order to show that they are capable of being more of the business people that they want to be. So take that step, because you know, outside of your comfort zone is really where the magic happens, and it's where you're going to create opportunities for yourself. The very, very best of luck. And if you want to stay in touch with me, here are all my contact details. Please write to me if you have any questions, or stay online for the question and answer session. I would love to connect with you outside of this presentation, so please follow me on social media. But in the meantime, what I would say to you is I shall look forward to seeing the photographs of you watching this presentation online, and please let me know how it goes when you get up there and you do your presentation. Thank you very much.